Sorry, I got cut off from time limit. Anyways, a good way to check is if my original is positive, then whatever is greater than 360 needs to also be positive. My negative needs to be the opposite. My other half that equals 360 together needs to be the opposite. That's why when I have 75, negative 285, 285 is negative. But when I have negative 75, then my number greater than 360 is also negative. And then the other part that matches together to make my full circle is the positive. So let's go back and let's do one with pi instead. So what I'm going to do is, instead of adding 360 or subtracting 360, I'm going to add and subtract 2 pi, because that is the same thing as 360. So when I take this and I add 2 pi, well, the problem is my denominator is different. When my denominators are different, I cannot add the fractions. They need to have like denominators. So now that gets me negative 2 pi over 7 plus 14 pi over 7. I just multiplied the top and the bottom by 7, so now they have like denominators. Well, negative 2 plus 14 is going to be 12 pi over 7. Okay, again, to check, I know if this answer's negative, my positive has to be less than 2 pi. Well, 12 divided by 7 is less than 2, because 14 divided by 7 is 2. So I know that will work. Then I'm going to take my negative 2 pi over 7, and I'm going to subtract 2 pi over 1. But again, I cannot subtract fractions unless they have like denominators. So that means I'm going to have negative 2 pi over 7 minus 14 pi over 7. Remember, all I did was multiply my numerator by 7 and my denominator by 7. So now I have like denominators. And I am going to get, well, this really becomes adding a negative, so I'm going to get negative 16 pi over 7. And again, with the negative means my number greater than 2 pi is going to be negative. This one is greater than 2 pi, so it is negative. Oh, you guys absolutely hate these questions, and I am not sure why. Let's start at the very beginning. You guys miss these questions because you don't draw a picture. You need to draw your sketch. So if it gives me a point, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my coordinate. Okay, so I'm going to go 1, 2, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to plot negative 2, 5. Okay, I just plot my point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my terminal line, and then it is just like our reference angles. I'm going to go straight down to my x-axis, and there's my triangle. Okay, and here is my theta. Remember, this just means an unknown angle measure. It can be degrees or radians. Now, how far did I go from my origin on this side right here? I went negative 2, so my base of my triangle is going to be negative 2. How high did I go up? 5, so that's the height of my triangle. Now, how do I find out what my hypotenuse is? I'm going to do Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It does not matter which one's my a or my b, but it does matter which one's my c, and that is my hypotenuse. My hypotenuse is always going to be my longest side, which is going to be across from my right angle. So here I'm going to have 5 squared plus negative 2 squared. That's going to equal my c squared. 5 squared is going to be 25 plus negative 2 times negative 2 is going to be 4. So I'm going to get 29 but that's my c squared. For just c, I'm going to have the square root of 29. My hypotenuse is always positive. Do not forget that. So this is going to be the square root of 29. Now I have to find my trig values. So I'm always going to start with the 3 that I remember from geometry, which is going to be sine of theta. I'm going to have cosine of theta, and I'm going to have tangent of theta. Now, if you do not remember what to do here because it's not our unit circle and it doesn't give us our x values and our y values, this is the time you're going to use your SOHCAHTOA. Or some old hippo caught another hippo tripping over apples. Or SOHCAHTOA, whichever one works for you guys. So I know my sine is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. So my opposite is going to be across from my angle, which is going to be my 5, and then it's going to be over my hypotenuse, which is the square root of 29. Okay, but wait a second, we cannot have a square root on the bottom. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have my 5 over square root of 29, and I'm going to have to multiply by the square root of 29 over the square root of 29, and I'm going to get 5 times the square root of 29 over 29. So my tangent really equals 5 square root of 29 over 29. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do our cosine. Cosine is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent is going to be the one next to it. It's not going to be this side. That is my hypotenuse. So if you get confused, make sure you label it to make sure you don't accidentally choose that for your adjacent. My adjacent is going to be this one. So I get -2 over my square root of 29 because that is my hypotenuse. Well, oops, can't have a square root on the bottom. So I'm going to have to multiply by the square root of 29 times the square root of 29. Two times the square root of 29 is going to be -2 times the square root of 29 all over 29. Now be careful here because a lot of you got points taken off on your quiz because you lost your negatives or because you never put a negative here to begin with. Make sure you do not lose your negatives. Okay, now we need to do tangent. So tangent is going to equal opposite over adjacent. Yes, it does equal sine over cosine. I can take this and divide it by this, and I will get tangent. However, I don't want to mess with these numbers. These are not pretty numbers. Can I use my opposite? Do I know what my opposite side is? Yes, that's my 5. Do I know what my adjacent side is? Yes, that's my 2. So I would much rather just write 5 over -2. That is going to be a whole lot easier than trying to take this and dividing by this. So I'm just going to use my SOHCAHTOA, which is perfectly fine. Okay, I can leave it as a fraction as well. Now I still have 3 more trig values I need to find. So I need to find my sine reciprocal, which is going to be cosecant. And to do that, all I have to do is flip my answer. I do not want to flip this one because then I'm going to get a square root on the bottom again and I'm going to have more work to do. So I'm just going to flip my original. Do I have a square root still on the bottom? No. so I can leave it just like that. Cosine, the reciprocal is secant. Same thing, I do not want to flip this nasty fraction, because if I flip it, then I'm going to have a square root on the bottom, and I'm going to have to do more work. So I'm going to take the original, and I'm going to flip it. I'm going to get the square root of 29 over 2. But don't forget your negative sign. Now, do I have a square root on the bottom? No, so I can keep it like that. Then I have tangent. The reciprocal of tangent is going to be cotangent. And that is going to give me negative 2 over 5. Again, do not lose your negatives. Goodness gracious, another one you guys have problems with. Again, you must include a picture. If you do not include a picture, that is where 95% of the mistakes come from. So I'm going to draw my coordinate grid first. Okay, now it says it's between pi and 3 pi over 2. Where here's pi and 3 pi over 2 is right here. So I know which quadrant it's going to be in. It has to be in this quadrant. So I can go ahead and draw my circle. But remember, I am going to draw it out because it is a terminal angle. And my angle on the inside is going to be right here. It can be x or theta. It does not matter. Tangent. Remember, tangent means sine over cosine or opposite over adjacent. Well, I have the number 5. So I have 5 on the top. What do I put underneath to make it a fraction? 1. Okay, so that means my opposite is going to be 5. And my adjacent is going to be 1. Now, which side's your adjacent? The short one or the long one? Well, the long one's always going to be your hypotenuse. So A will be the short one next to your angle. Now, another way to remember that if you have tangent, remember we said it's sine over cosine. Sine's your y. Across was my y. Cosine's my x. This is my x value. Now what I have to do is I have to figure out what my c value is, what my hypotenuse is, to be able to find my cosine. So I'm going to do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I get 1 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. Well, 1 squared is going to be 1, plus 5 squared is 25. So I'm going to get 26. But again, that's my c squared. To find just c, I need to find the square root of 26. Okay, so this is going to be the square root of 26. Now to find cosine, that is going to be my SOHCAHTOA for help. Again, my cosine is right here, and it's going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. So my adjacent is going to be 1 over my hypotenuse, which is going to be the square root of 26. However, again, we cannot have the square root on the bottom, so we multiply by the square root of 26 over the square root of 26, and we get the square root of 26 over 26. However, that is going to be wrong because this is a negative and this is a negative, and when I have negative 1 here, that means this will be negative square root of 26 over 26.